Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back. It is a brand new episode of UFC Banter. This week we are in London. It's all going down with a featherweight fight to decide who leaves with that O intact. We've got the undefeated Movsar Evloev, the Russian wrestler, looking to take out the hometown guy, the miracle, Lerone Murphy. He is 9-0-1 in the UFC, a draw in his first fight. He's got 9 straight wins since. Somebody's O has got to go, guys. Let's figure it out in this main event. I'm super excited to break down this card. We already had one fight fall off on the scale. Shout out to Luana Carolina. So I believe we've got 13 fights left to break down on the board. You know that even if we don't have a great guest, we still break down the card because we can't leave you guys to do it alone. And my brother Wiz, he's just been super busy at work. So I know some people have been asking in the chat, what's going on with Wiz? He's just been very busy. You know, my man's been doing good things, all productive things. So we wish him nothing but the best, but we're still going to roll solo today. And without further ado, guys, let's break down this first fight of the night. Shout out to everybody rocking with us live in the chat. I see a lot of night owls already. Cam Junkin making his presence felt. The It Factor, Arrow as well. Shout out to all you guys. Thank you so much for being here. And, you know, if you guys have questions, comments, concerns, make your presence felt in the chat. Now, with that being said, first fight, Chanel Dyer taking on Ravenna Oliveira. Very infrequently do you see a fighter come off of a loss, you know, on the Contender Series and get signed to the UFC. Even less frequently do you see them come in and be a massive favorite in their UFC debut. So you have to ask some hard questions here about whether or not you want to trust Chanel Dyer coming off of a fight where she was dropped 3 times. You know, Carol Foro, big, strong, physical, dangerous puncher, and, you know, was a very live underdog in that matchup. You know, came through and obviously got the win there. Now Dyer installed as a favorite once again, a huge favorite, and it's because on the other side, Ravenna Oliveira, she's 0-2 in the UFC. She started her career at bantamweight in this promotion and went out there and lost against Tainara Lisboa. She drops 2 weight classes, and I was optimistic. I was thinking to myself, you know, she's going to go out there. She's going to be much more proactive with the wrestling, with the grappling. That's what she's going to push now that she's dropped 2 weight classes. And instead, you know, she really attempts like no takedowns against Luciano. She ends up getting submitted on the mat. She gets beat up on the feet. She just did not have very much to offer. And so I think that Ravenna Oliveira, what's the potential upside with her? You know, she can go out there and land some punches on the feet. You know, they're not pretty. She doesn't throw a huge amount of volume, but she can land some punches on the feet. And Dyer has been finished before, you know, on the regional scene. When you look back to her amateur record, she does have losses as an amateur via finish against girls that are of middling quality in the UFC, like a Shauna Bannon, for example. So I think that we have to look at Chanel Dyer and say, are the skills there? Yeah. Is she a dangerous looking striker? Yes. Is it impressive that she has like, you know, kill shot knockouts in this women's side of the game? Absolutely. And I do think that there's a chance she could go out there and finish Ravenna Oliveira if she's able to get into her striking flow, if she looks good, if she does not have those UFC jitters. But I want to know, where's her confidence at coming off a fight where she got knocked down 3 times? You know, is she going to come forward and press the issue? And what is the dynamic between these two in the wrestling and the grappling? Because Ravenna Oliveira got 2 takedowns against Tainara Lisboa, but then she gave up 3 takedowns on the comeback. She was getting taken down by Luciano, but Luciano, in my opinion, is a more proven grappler and a proven physical talent at the UFC level. So I think that Chanel Dyer just has a lot to prove at this minus 500 price tag. Do I think that she gets the win? I think she more often than not does. Do I think that it helps that she's in this backdrop in England? I think that that's also going to be to her benefit. So ultimately, you know, I think that this is a dogger pass money line situation. I think the pick is Dyer, but, you know, I can't really trust Ravenna Oliveira because I expected her to do better in both of her previous UFC fights. And the Lisboa fight, like maybe you could say she's undersized, but then the Luciano fight, you know, she just looked like she was not on the same level. And I do think that Dyer could be a prospect in this division. The problem with Ravenna Oliveira is you look back and before she got to the UFC, she fought nobody. She fought absolute cans. And I think that kind of reflects in how she fights at the UFC level. I think she's not really prepared for these kind of caliber fighters. And meanwhile, Dana looked at Chanel Dyer and even in a loss, thought that she did look like she could hang with UFC level fighters. And I kind of agree. So I would make Chanel Dyer maybe like a minus 250 favorite in this spot. And, I think that Ravenna Oliveira, she just doesn't have like one ace up her sleeve, like, oh, she's great at jujitsu or her knockout power. Like she just doesn't really have one thing that she's really good at. But if it just plays out like a close, gross WMMA decision, then I think you'd rather have the plus 375. And I think if it was on neutral ground, like if this fight was at the Apex, I think she would probably be much closer to like a plus 250, plus 200 underdog. So let's see how it goes in this first fight of the night. But I'll reluctantly pick Dyer because she's actually a doer of things. She went out there and landed 120 strikes, I believe, in a loss on Contender Series. And Ravenna Oliveira, meanwhile, guys, has landed 39 significant strikes in 2 UFC fights, 5+ rounds of fighting. That's just not enough output to win fights at this level. All right, guys. Speaking of, we've got the next fight, Shamrock taking on Abdul Karim, Al Sawadi. And this has been like the Twitter war of the week. Like everybody seems to have a side on this fight. And I don't really have super strong feelings about either one of these fighters. I will just say that I think that Shamrock gets a lot of grief for that Nurullo Aliyev fight. And I don't know that Nurullo Aliyev wouldn't be able to defeat Al Sawadi, So I think that maybe we have to just analyze the matchup for what it is. And I think that Al Sawadi is the better process fighter. When I wrote about this fight, I think that if this fight goes the distance, if you see 15 minutes of action here, Al Sawadi probably is just the one who's going to throw more traditional boxing combinations, move in and out of range, touch to the head, touch to the body, maybe throw a low kick here or there. And, he's going to try and play like prevent defense, right? Like protect your chin, move in and out, touch him a little bit. And he might even mix in the takedowns. I think that Shamrock is a guy that prides himself on his jiu-jitsu. He's clearly very technical with his submissions, but he's also a guy that, he's technical to a certain level, right? Like, I don't think that at the UFC level, in the 155-pound division that's full of, sharks, I don't know that his jiu-jitsu is going to stack up with the very top guys, but I do think that he's got a slick back take. I think he can be very opportunistic with that. I think he's good at not only holding that position, but also using that position to finish the rear naked choke. So I think that those are the positive attributes with Shem. You look at his size, his length. Those are things that can, really help you when you're trying to get to those positions, when you're trying to leverage those submissions as well. And so I think that, if this is a pure, fight where nobody gets hurt, nobody gets rocked, nobody gets hit hard, then I think that Al Sawadi will probably end up winning it unless he makes a major mistake in the grappling, which I don't foresee. But I think that Shamrock has a chance to go out there and, with an errant punch, if this guy just throws a fist in a forward direction, I think he might hurt Al Sawadi. I do think Al Sawadi, the 4 losses on his record are all via knockout. He was fighting fairly well against his opponent. Goodness gracious, I'm drawing a blank on his name. It's going to bother me. What is his name that Al Sawadi fought and he got finished, man? It was the oh goodness, I have to look at it now. Al Sawadi. He was fighting well. It was like 2 takedowns to 2. And who was it, man? I'm going to get it right now. I just pulled up the Tapology. Loic Radzhabov. I can't believe I couldn't pull that. That's embarrassing. But Loic Radzhabov, guys, in that fight, he was looking pretty good. He's having some success. And the problem is he's just a guy that always feels like he's one mistake away from the fight just slipping out of his hands, right? And meanwhile, Shamrock, in that fight that was not going his way against Nurullo Aliyev, he got touched up a little bit in that fight. He really defended a lot of the takedowns, kind of shut down that part of the game for Aliyev. And then when you just look at, he was able to get his own takedown late. I feel like Shamrock just showed that he went out there and competed. He's hard to put away. He sticks around for 15 minutes and gives himself a chance. And that's one thing that can just be a difference maker, right? it's just being able to stick around for 15 minutes. And so I feel durability and danger could be Shamrock's advantage here. I think if the fight ends inside the distance, more often than not, Shamrock got it done. And the reason I think the line flipped to Shamrock being the favorite is once again the crowd dynamics and the, judging situation that I described before on the last fight, where if this is a close fight and a close decision, maybe they raise Shamrock's hand as the local guy. And I do think that Alawadi, he was fighting well. He was fighting close in that Loic Radzhabov fight, but they were like dead even on strikes. They both got like 2 takedowns apiece, or maybe it was 3 to 4 or something. It was super competitive. And if it's going to be a super competitive fight, if Alawadi's not going to distance himself, if he might get hurt at any point in the fight from an errant strike, those are all things to me that kind of work against you. But yeah, I feel like Alawadi on process, he probably should be a little bit of a better fighter. So for me, it's Alawadi in a decision-only market. It's Shamrock if you like a finish, because I just think he's a little bit more durable, a little bit more dangerous. All right. Next up, we got Louis Sutherland and Brando Peric. Speaking of durable and dangerous, I feel like the dynamics are flipped here, right? Like I feel like Louis Sutherland is a durable guy. He got finished in his last fight against Walter Walker. Walter Walker, guys, is currently on the longest win streak, funny enough, in the heavyweight division. Nobody has a longer win streak. Not the champion, not the challenger, nobody, right? Like people might be tied. You might have the same win streak, but nobody has a longer win streak in the heavyweight division than Walter Walker. And he's done it the same way to all these guys, gone out there and submitted them in the very first round. It's so hilarious to me, guys, that Łukasz Brzeski has a win over the guy with the longest win streak in the UFC's heavyweight division. If that's not an indictment of your division, I don't know what is, but I bet Brzeski that night. And when you look at that, it was because I thought Brzeski could go out there and exist with him. This was before all the heel hooks. And, a guy who can go out there and exist at heavyweight for the full 15, that can get some guys tired. That can get some guys frustrated. That can give you some opportunities. And for Louis Sutherland, that's the calling card of his career. He's had 14 professional fights, and he's been finished one time. And that one finish loss was against a guy who would probably heel hook Brando Peric with a shocking quickness as well. So you look at, how these guys match up. It's a completely different matchup. Meanwhile, Brando Peric came in against Alicia Ellison, and that was a fight where I thought that Brando Peric would go out there and probably, go out there and knock him out, right? Probably go out there and get the finish. But I did put in my notes, this guy did slow down on his regional, and this guy did have some sketchy moments. And he goes out there and he switches from being technical at times to going all out wild, balls to the wall, getting crazy exchanges. And when you do that and you kind of empty the jug, empty the tank in these wild swinging matches, if you don't put the guy down, Mike Tyson says you can fight for the knockout or you can fight for the decision. And I think Louis Sutherland, it's not to say that he fights for the decision per se. I just think that he's a guy that is not as dangerous as some other heavyweights in the first round. And so he's trying to wait you out. He's trying to touch you. He's trying to move you around. He's trying to grab a hold of you. He's trying to do things that slow you down and outlast you. And I do think that that is a path to beating Brando Peric. And so for me, again, if you like the Brando side, if you're looking at this fight from a DFS perspective, I think both these guys are sound in terms of ways you could look to play this, because Peric is a guy that has, respect in the first round in this matchup. He could come out here and land something big. But when you have a guy who's never been finished with strikes and he's fought some big guys and he's fought some heavy hitters, then, it's pretty presumptive that Peric can just go out here and clean him up in the first round. And what we don't know about Peric is if he could fight late, if he can go deep. When we've seen him in the second round, it was not pretty. The grappling looked bad. The cardio looked bad. None of it looked good, right? And again, like I mentioned, when you go out there and fight like a spaz at times and just like empty the tank, he can look clean and technical for moments, but he just seems like a guy who really loves the aggression, loves the violence. And, I can think of a guy like Tom Nolan, a guy who's had some success in the UFC, but he got super excited and overzealous in a fight and just sprinted onto something and got clipped. I think it was Mota that ended up clipping him. And I think that when you just look at, again, the crowd dynamics, the guy who had to fly all the way over here in Peric against the guy who's fighting closer to his backyard in Sutherland, I just think, again, similar guys in age, Peric is a little bit bigger, but Sutherland is no small man, right? He looks like two men standing next to each other in terms of the width of his back. So I feel like Sutherland can go out there and compete if he doesn't get cleaned up in round one. And so for that reason, it may be a small pre-investment on Sutherland and a look at live on Sutherland. But my guy Artem in the chat, shout out to Artem, much respect, says the Balkan Bear, and he is a dangerous threat in the first round, no doubt about it. When you're going spastic and balls to the wall and fighting for the knockout, you can put people to sleep, right? And Sutherland, I do think, maybe looks a little bit less sauced up than he did on the regional scene, but Lord willing, my brother got off the cycle at the right time, and he comes in ready to scrap, ready to move, take some shots, clinch this guy against the fence, knee him a little bit, try and slow him down. I think that's the path for Sutherland here. So I'd rather go deeper into an investment if this guy was, making sure that we had seen the other side of round one. But I feel like when I just look at these two and how they match up, Peric is the more dangerous guy, but not the guy who is more durable or has better cardio over the long term based on what I've seen. So for me, Sutherland has a chance to come out here and, win this fight. My guy Joey says, wouldn't shock me if Peric wins a hidden move decision sloppy fight. Hey, I think that's not outside the realm of possibility. I could see these guys going over and it being sloppy. We've seen Sutherland lose decisions before. But for me, it's almost seeing is believing with a Peric decision, because his drop-off between round 1 and 2 in that regional fight was so astronomical. And most of his fights are, quick KOs against guys that are not very good. And so Sutherland, the one thing that he has is a lot of cage time, a lot of experience. And instead of, coming in on short notice against a guy who's on a win streak in the UFC, now he's got a full training camp against a guy who's very inexperienced relative to him. And they're otherwise similar in age. Both guys, I think, are fairly athletic. I just think Sutherland, a little bit more of that, long-term cardio, if you know what I'm saying. I appreciate the support in the chat as well from Feats and Deef. Thank you so much. Hopefully I got your name right there. Next up, guys, we got Antonio Traculli against Mantis contra Deicious. And I think that when you look at Antonio Traculli, there's one place you don't want to be in fighting, which is with one foot out the door, because it just does not, compute with good results, right? Fighting is a dangerous game, and you have to really believe you're going to win. You have to go fight with your heart in order to give yourself the best chance. And even if you do everything right, you could still lose a fight. And I think that if you already have a pre-built-in excuse, if you already have, a reason why not, it's hard to go out there and win. Could you win by accident? Sure. Could you go out there and make something happen, in a moment of opportunism? Absolutely. A fight is a fight. Anything could happen. But I think that when you look at, a guy like Mantis contra Deicious, he goes out there and he is not 1 foot out the door. He is 10 toes down in the cage, ready to get into a fight and, basically coming back with the shield or on it. And I feel like for Traculli, he talks about that, but I feel like when it comes down to it, he'd rather, find the way to get guillotined, slip his way into a choke, rather than, go out on his shield throwing bombs. Like, I just don't think he's about that life in the same way that Mantis is, with all due respect. And so Traculli has, really struggled to win fights, lately, right? It's been a long time since Traculli's won a fight. And Traculli's run in the UFC is getting beat up by Shara Bullet and then putting himself in two pretty ugly first-round guillotine chokes against guys not known for their submission prowess. Mantis contra Deicious has some submissions on his record. I would not be surprised if Traculli just, sticks his head in the hole and finds a way out in this fight. But ultimately, I just think Mantis is going to come forward, aggressively strike this guy and try and take him out. And unless Traculli lands like a check left hook or goes out there and, takes him to the mat and finds a submission early, I think he's going to gas out. I don't think he's going to come very prepared for this fight. I think he's going to quit if he faces adversity. And all those things lead me to believe that Mantis wins this fight and probably just smashes him really easily. He's the much younger guy. The one thing I will say, though, is Traculli is a good bit bigger by the measurables. And I do think that Traculli, if he wants to get another opportunity to milk the UFC for whatever he's getting on his contract, then he needs to go out there and win this fight. He still might not get re-signed if he wins, but that's the only chance. And so I feel like whatever chance Traculli has, it's probably in the early going. So ultimately, I think it's Mantis. It's Mantis probably by sub in the first round, but I think it goes under 1.5. And somebody says, I bet the under 0.5. I can't really blame you. Traculli doesn't want to get hit so he can go play poker. Yeah, you wouldn't want to get brain damage, from fighting and then go try and risk your coins that way, right? So I feel like, Traculli might just look for a little bit of a softer landing. And it's not like Mantis never submitted anybody before, but he definitely is an aggressive striker. So you don't want to play games with Mantis on the feet. He's going to want to shoot that desperation takedown right away if he wants to get submitted and cash my guy Cam that under 0.5 rounds. But that's plenty of time on that fight. We can move to the next fight, guys, where Mario Pinto takes on Felipe Franco. And, I did my write-up on this fight, and at the risk of looking foolish, I said, I think Mario Pinto wins, but I also included Felipe Franco by submission as part of my prediction for, how this could go wrong. And when you look at Mario Pinto, he's got 11 wins as a professional. I do think that Mario Pinto is the much more dangerous striker. Like if Felipe Franco gets 0 takedowns, he's going to get absolutely lit on fire on the feet. As far as I'm concerned, Felipe Franco has an extremely soft strength of schedule. When you look back at the guys that he fought on the regional scene, one of the things that plagues at times the Brazilian regional scene is just a complete mismatching of opponents, where you take somebody who's got some real promise, some real ability, and you just match make them with 0-1 fighters, 0-0 fighters, really not very serious opponents. And so that makes it hard to judge somebody. But what I did note from Felipe Franco is that he's got a pretty consistent process of going out there and trying to take somebody down and then try and submit them or try and damage them from the top position. He tries to take people down, though. And when you look at Mario Pinto, in his last fight, he was able to take down a guy who's a former Glory kickboxer, right? And that's like, hey, good idea, right? Like nothing wrong with that. It was a smart approach. And I think that when you look at, his first fight with Austin Lane, he gets rocked by Austin Lane, and then he's able to come back and absolutely dominate, right? And I think that Pinto, the longer this fight goes, the better that this fight probably looks for him. But when I look at what Franco's going to bring to the table, I think he's going to ask a question of Pinto that we haven't really seen answered, which is, what do you do when somebody really aggressively comes out there trying to take you down and, put you into jiu-jitsu positions? And I think that, the Galpa de Luta game plan, they've kind of been pretty clear about what they want to do in the UFC, right? Like they're all coming out there looking to wrestle and grapple, except for that one guy who stands there and gets punched in the face until he gets knocked out. So if you throw that guy out of the sample size, everybody else from the team, from Eduardo Mora to Jelton Almeida, they come out there and really aggressively grapple. And he's a young guy, and he's a little bit undersized. But I will just say, if there was ever a weight class where you could be a tiny bit smaller than somebody and still make it happen in the grappling, it is when a guy is like 220 some odd pounds against a heavyweight. And the reason I say that is because we see it in NCAA wrestling. Shout out to Otto in the chat, says, know you're a big wrestling guy. Grew up with Shane Van Ness, hoping he gets it done tomorrow. I'm going to wish your guy best of luck. NCAA March Madness, the wrestling tournament has been absolutely incredible this year. I've enjoyed watching it. And when you look at a guy like Franco, he went out there and he took down Freddie Vidal 6 times, right? He controlled him for large portions of the fight. Freddie Vidal is a guy that comes from a wrestling background. He's a guy that comes from a college wrestling background. Is he the best wrestler in the world? No. Is he the best athlete in the world? No. Is he the best MMA fighter in the world? No. But he stayed pretty consistent in his process. And when Franco got tired, Freddie still had a little bit more to give. He squeezed on his neck. I didn't even think he had much of a choke locked in, and Franco gave it up. But Franco was used to having his way, to dominating everybody. And when he went against an American wrestler for the first time, he lost. But now he's not going against an American wrestler. He's going against a guy who hasn't really faced as much adversity, I would say, in the wrestling and grappling phase of his game. So I think that Pinto wins this fight, But I think that Franco could go out there and get a takedown in this fight. And I think that if he does that, the submission prop is probably going to look live at the huge numbers that it is. So, yeah, that's the thing for me that, do I think Pinto wins? Yes. Do I think the longer it goes, the better for him? Yes. Do I think Pinto, KO 2-3 is a viable play? Sure. I just think that if you are looking for, how does this go wrong? How does Pinto become the parlay buster with 98% of the votes on Tapology and everybody thinks Franco's a fraud? Franco came in as a pretty sizable favorite, if my memory serves, on Contender Series. And yes, he did look fraudulent in that loss, but he also had 6 takedowns and whatever against a wrestler. And I do just wonder, when you move up against these heavyweights, we've seen his teammate Jailton Almeida was a 205er, moved up to heavyweight, took down a bunch of guys, beat him up on the ground, made him look like white belts. And I do think that's the one potential upside for Franco in this fight is his game plan. And Cam says was thinking about his takedown prop. If I see a takedown prop, that is something I would consider as well for Franco in this fight. So, yeah, I think that Pinto probably wins. I think he probably wins the longer that it goes on. But minus 900 pre-fight, if I think he might get taken down in the first round, that's not for me. So I think that, even when you look at DFS options, I don't think Pinto's a horrible option because obviously he's got, KO equity. He's got finish equity. He's shown, proven scoring ability. But I think that when you look at some of the other options, you have to look and say, man, is Pinto as live to finish in round 1 as some of these other guys? Maybe he's the most, but it's the odds don't say that, right? The odds reflect instead that he's plus 105 to win inside the distance, whereas some of these other guys like Mantis, like Iwo, who we'll talk about later, they're like minus 180 to win inside the distance. I can show you guys a chart that I made earlier that breaks that down, but I did think that it was interesting. So shout out to everybody who's rocking with us in the chat. Joey says Franco round 1 sub is probably wild. I think that you're probably right. It's almost certainly a huge price given the money line, the sheer disparity here. Let me take a look. And also Franco does have a number of wins by knockout, so that could influence the bookmakers. Pinto sub is taking some money, which is interesting to me. I was considering earlier in the week the ends by sub because I knew that it was going to be a prop that got hit down, the Pinto sub, and the ends by sub I thought was a much better bet, just in terms of trying to get some equity from the opponent as well. But taking a look here, the Pinto, the Franco sub round 1 is 35-1. So yeah, it's a very big number, and I do think that is probably the vast majority of his win equity. But I also think that if he's able to get a takedown and just camp on top, then he might be able to do that multiple rounds. So that's the other thing is maybe a decision's in play when somebody's a massive underdog like this. Maybe you just don't get cute and you take the money line. But I think he probably falls apart over time. I just think that. Pinto's a guy I respect, a guy I think is a pretty good fighter. When you just have a question about somebody's game that you don't feel has been fully answered, and you have somebody that's going to go out there and push that part of the game, it's definitely an interesting line at plus 650, All right, next up, we've got Nathaniel Wood taking on Lucien Keta, and this is a fight where I was so close to placing a bet, and then the line moved on the book that I was going to place it on, so it gave me more time to think, and I still haven't decided exactly what I'm going to do with it. But the prop that I was looking at here was the fight not to go the distance, and I just feel like Nathaniel Wood, every fight of his is like a flirt with death for him, for his opponent. Every guy is on the verge of getting knocked out, and then they somehow rally. He almost finished Nemov late. He got hurt in that fight. Then you look back, and Wood is getting hurt by Feely and hurting him, and they're just having these back and forth crazy wars. And I think that eventually the bill comes due on that, right? And I feel like Nathaniel Wood, all these fights recently have been featuring knockdowns, and I just think something's got to give. Meanwhile, on the Keta side, his one loss as a professional was inside the distance. It was technically due to a injury, but he's also been hurt before on the film. He's a guy that takes a lot of risks on the feet. Nathaniel Wood, a sharpshooter on the counter, maybe he could land something. He does throw head kicks as well. I think if you have a guy who's super durable, either body shots or head kicks are probably the way that you're going to try and rattle him. And I think that when you look at a guy like Keta, he just hits like an absolute truck. He's extremely quick. He's a guy that is, difficult to get a beat on. He's also a guy that can just, kind of brute force his way through his offense. So he can be a little slick and technical, but for the most part, he wants to just crash forward, knowing that his bang is better than your bang, and he can take the shot coming back better than you can. And that has served him very well. And he's 28 years of age. He looks to be in his athletic prime. He made weight. He looked like an absolute professional in terms of his physique, his appearance on the scales. And so he's fighting a Londoner in London. He's fighting a guy who's had a ton of UFC experience. He's fighting. Oh my God, that's hilarious. My guy says Jubilee sleeps Keta in round one. That's a absolute galaxy brain take. That's very interesting. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see if that fight ever gets booked. But in any case, right, we're at 145. I think Jubilee fights at 155. But right now, Keta, he's covered the spread in other organizations up at 155. But he's a dangerous cat. And at 145, he's a very big fighter for this division. It says that Nathaniel Wood is going to be what is that, 5'6" on the screen? Yeah, 5'6" compared to 5'7". He's going to be giving up 3 inches of reach. I think that Keta is going to be able to compete with the speed, and I think that Keta hits like an absolute truck, and I think that Nathaniel Wood gets hurt too often, and I just think that bill is going to come due. So ultimately, I am high on Keta coming into the UFC. I think that the UFC was trying to get Pitbull smoked in that last fight. And I do think that, I have a ton of respect for Pitbull, but we've seen the UFC does not matchmake guys from Bellator and these other American competitive organizations, with the intent to get them easy fights and easy wins, in my humble opinion. And I think that, for Keta, this is not an easy fight. This is a difficult fight, but I just think he's a good fighter and he's prepared for difficult fights. And for that reason, I'm going to pick him to get the win here. And I'm actually going to pick him to get the knockout as well. I think that both guys, could have big shots and hurt each other. I just think the difference is when Keta gets to the positions where he hurts Nathaniel Wood, I think he will finish the fight. So give me Keta to finish this fight. All right, man. That takes us to the next fight on the card. This is an awesome one, and one where I kind of went through a bit of an evolution in my thought process throughout the week. You've got the more experienced guy here in Mason Jones. He's 30 years of age, the Welsh Dragon. And Mason Jones, he's a gamer, right? He's a tough guy. He's willing to take one to give one. He's willing to stand in. I feel like if you watch back his film, one thing that jumps out is this guy takes a ton of damage in all of his fights. He gets busted up. He's marked up. He's wearing it. He's bleeding out the nose. He's bleeding out the mouth. He's got a cut here. He's got a cut there. The guy just seems to take a ton of damage in these fights. He's willing to stand in there and take the shots. And that is something that I do feel eventually, again, I said it in the last breakdown, but I'll say it. I think that bill will eventually come due. Maybe at 30 years of age, he can continue to take these big shots and keep coming forward. But we saw, he got taken off his feet by Ludovic Klein, just absolutely sent to the floor. And, Ludovic Klein is a guy that really gets tired. And so Ludovic Klein kind of just took that opportunity to bank the round, kind of camp on top of him, recover his breathing. I didn't think he really pushed to go get the finish there when he hurt Mason Jones. And I think that Mason Jones, against Jeremy Stevens, you can get away with that, right? But against Balaji, he got hurt so bad. He's just getting hurt in these fights. He's getting clipped and he's having to rally. He's having to rely on that toughness and that durability. And I feel like for Axel Sola on the other side, he did face some adversity if you watch his regional footage, but I expected him to struggle more in his UFC debut. He's moving up a weight class. He's taking on Rhys McKee on short notice. Rhys McKee had a bunch of experience in the UFC, And he joined Khamzat Chimaev as the only other fighter to stop Reese McKee inside the octagon. Chidi and Njokuani didn't get him out of there, right? And you look at Axel Sola, and again, he's up a weight class. He's clearly a little bit smaller than Reese McKee. But what was he able to do? He was able to touch him. He was able to damage him, bust up his face, leave meaningful moments for the judges where they could look and go, wow, look at Reese wearing the damage, whereas Axel Sola is being a little bit more defensively responsible. He's moving a little bit more on the outside. And you watch how Axel Sola was able to deal with that fight. Later on in the fight, that's when Reese McKee normally takes over. That's when he's building. That's when he's feeling good and starting to flow a little bit. And Axel Sola wisely, while he was starting to fatigue, said, you know what? I'm going to rip the body. I'm going to go out there and really put hands on this guy's body. And he was able to hurt Reese to the body, a very tough guy, a very durable guy upstairs. He hurt him downstairs instead. I thought it was a slightly premature stoppage, but I also thought it was from an accumulation of damage. And you look at Axel Sola, I think he could do a lot of damage in this fight. He's a southpaw, just like Ludwig Klein was when he was landing the big shots, the left hands, the lead hand as well. The thing about Mason Jones, I think that could get him caught in this fight. And if Axel Sola is as diligent with his tape study as he says that he is, then I think he will have noticed that Mason Jones doesn't really see the lead hand of a southpaw. He's very focused on their left hand. So you can use your kicks to set up your left hand as a southpaw, and Sola, I think, will look to do that. He's very powerful with that open side left kick. But I also think that when you look at what Sola can do, I think that Sola might be able to have some success using his lead hand to snipe at Mason Jones. And I think that for those reasons, when you look at the underdog price tag, when you look at how he fought in his debut, Mason Jones is a guy that clearly has talent. And I think that the way he wins this fight is by taking some damage, by getting to his wrestling, getting to his grappling, trying to take this guy down. I think that if you're looking for a long shot on the Mason Jones side, I think you probably look at the Mason Jones submission prop. He's a guy that always threatens it, right? He always gets to the positions. He locks up the Kimura on Jeremy Stevens for a grip. He always looks like he's going to go get that sub, even against Belagioki, right? He ends up getting the TKO from ground and pound instead of getting to that submission finish. But you're looking at Mason Jones in this fight by submission over 10-1 on the price tag. And I do feel like if I was his coach, I would be saying, you need to go wrestle this guy, take him down like your life depends on it. I feel like Axel Sola is the guy who's going to land the more meaningful shots on the feet. I feel like he's probably a little bit more sound with his decision-making inside the cage. The thing that I don't like about Mason Jones is he tries to be an entertainer. He tries to put on fun fights. I think Axel Sola tries to win by any means necessary, and I think that's going to be to his benefit. I'm going to pick the underdog here, Axel Sola, to get the win. I think it's going to be a close fight. Like I said, if you like the Jones side, I think it's going to be based on takedowns, wrestling, grappling. So either one of these guys I think is a viable click from a DFS perspective, but ultimately I'm looking at Axel Sola as the pick for me, especially at plus 135 when he's the younger guy, he's the bigger guy. He looks roided to the absolute gills. He seems to be extremely well prepared for this fight. And I think that the guy has power on the feet, and I think Mason Jones walks onto big shots. So I think that this is the kind of fight where, he could, walk onto a big shot and finally get that chin cracked. All right. Next up, guys, really fun fight where we got Curtis Campbell taking on Danny Silva. And I have a lot of respect for Danny Silva, going the full 15 minutes with Kevin Vallejos, trying to compete with him on the feet. That's something commendable. I think this guy is tough. I think he's hard to kill. But I think that the way you want to get after this guy is more likely than not trying to push him in the wrestling and the grappling phase. Because if Kevin Vallejos can't knock this guy out on the feet, it's going to be very difficult to knock him out. The one thing I will say, though, is Curtis Campbell brings a much different approach than Kevin Vallejos. Kevin Vallejos likes to land his boxing. He likes to go out there and land big punches and knock guys out with that power, with his combination work at times. Likes to rip to the body, likes to rip to the head. But he mostly likes to go out there and just put hands on guys' chins and knock them the hell out. And when you look at Curtis Campbell, he's a much more diverse striker in terms of how he operates. He likes to go out there and throw kicks, throw knees, elbows, throw punches. He likes to mix things up to all levels of the body. And I think that more often than not, you're going to see him work from the outside using his kicks. And when he's able to, have an opponent crash in, he's going to look for his takedowns. He's going to look to get reactive. He's going to look to go to singles, doubles, body locks. The problem that I have, with a guy like Danny Silva is we haven't seen Danny Silva convert, finishes at the UFC level against UFC level opponents, right? He really needs to go out there and rely on getting the judges' nod, getting the judges' approval. And meanwhile, Curtis Campbell went out there against Dembasek in his Dana White Contender Series fight, absolutely cleaned him up. The guy's been a finisher throughout his career. The guy has a pretty decorated career as an amateur as well as a professional. And for Danny Silva, he's fighting kind of nip tuck with guys that you'd expect him to be a level above. Angel Pacheco, you'd expect him to be a level above, right? These fights that he's winning in the UFC, after he got the contract on Contender, after both guys landed a ton of significant strikes, he's kind of there to be hit on some of these returns because he's coming forward and just pressing the issue. When you look at, these split decisions that he's winning, they just don't inspire a lot of confidence. And I think that for Curtis Campbell, he can go out there and strike with this guy a little bit, use his kicks, use his movement, try and touch him as he's coming in, try and find him with splitting shots, elbows, big knees up the middle, knowing that he's going to push forward. But I really think that the bread and butter for Curtis Campbell, where his skills really shine, is on the mat. And I think that he does a good job mixing in damaging shots with submission attempts, with passes, with an overall high work rate. And I think he's got the cardio to back that up. And so I think that if we see Curtis Campbell going out there, flowing through his positions, working high, low, working to his takedowns, pushing the gas tank, I think that that is the way that he comes out here and justifies this price tag. I think that if he gets a little bit shell-shocked, stands on the feet too much, gets a little bit plotting with the footwork, lets Danny Silva get into a boxing rhythm, I think that's how the fight could get, off his script, right? But ultimately, I think that Curtis Campbell is a really special guy based on what I have seen. Could he come in and have UFC jitters? Absolutely. Will I be laying the minus 240? No. But do I think that he could go out there and potentially find a submission against Danny Silva? I do. I respect Danny Silva, but I think that Curtis Campbell, when he's punching you, when he's elbowing you, when he's kneeing you on the way up, when he hits a mat return, he does a really good job of finding a opportunity. And I just think that this is the kind of fight where in his debut, he's going to look to make some noise, make an appearance, let people know who he is. I think he's going to be trying to take the fight to the ground as much as he can. And eventually, I think an opportunity might pop up. If it doesn't, I think he'll be ahead on the scorecards. They'll raise his hand after 15 minutes. So give me the Pink Panther, Curtis Campbell, to get it done in his UFC debut. Let's say sub or decision for the prediction. All right, guys. Next up, if you gave me prime Roman Dolidze and I knew he was fully prepared, I would pick him to win this fight because I do think that Roman Dolidze, very good wrestler, very good grappler, kind of does a lot of things sneaky, but I think that we've seen in some of his recent fights a regression to his game, a regression to his aggression. A guy who used to be really assertive in the cage, very physical, extremely dynamic. I feel like some of those qualities have left him. And the problem with Dolidze is he was always slow, but he made up for it by being durable, being tough as shit, coming forward through adversity, swinging big overhands, swinging big head kicks, giving himself chances with offense, swinging big knees. And then when he got fights to the ground, he could change things instantly. Jack Hermanson was the one that initiated the takedowns, but every time it was Roman Dolidze using the front headlock, using his guillotine, using his attacks, falling back to the guard, using his ability to get underneath and invert. And then he goes to that calf slicer position where he submits and TKOs Jack Hermanson, something he's made a habit of earlier in his career. He went out there and submitted Phil Hawes. They didn't call the fight off, so then he knocked him cold out on the feet as well. You look at Dolidze, in his prime, again, a dangerous man, but 37 going on 38 shortly. I just don't know that I feel like I could trust this guy to show up prepared. The one thing I will say that makes CLD hard to trust It's just that he's been inconsistent in his performances. He's had a couple fights where he looked, kind of flat in the UFC, I think is a fair way to put it. Just didn't show his best stuff, didn't show his best skills, didn't make great decisions. But I think if you look at the bulk of his recent work, CLD has looked extremely dangerous. He's looked extremely fast. And I think Roman Dolidze has looked comparatively very slow, and speed kills in fighting. So I think CLD is the much more dangerous fighter here. I think if you like the Roman side, one thing that you might want to look at is Roman to get a takedown. I think if Roman doesn't get a takedown in this fight, he's fucked, honestly. Like, I just think he's going to be too slow. I think he's not going to have the ability to go out there and deal with a guy who can really move, stick, touch him, hit him with clean shots, surprise him with stuff. I don't think that's a good recipe for Roman. If Roman wants to win this fight, he needs a takedown. He might even need multiple takedowns. He showed way back in the Staropoli fight, he just wrestled that guy like his life depended on it, and he was able to out-wrestle him, right? So it's been like 5 years, right? If I knew Dolidze could do it, then I'd be like, yeah, he's got a path, right? We saw RoboCop do it. But we just don't really see Dolidze shoot takedowns, so I can't trust him to do that. And for that reason, I'm going to go with CLD. And I think that CLD, unfortunately, might be the first guy to stop Roman with strikes. I know that he ended up getting submitted. He nearly got knocked out by Imavov. He's kind of skirted death a few times in the UFC. And I just think that his bill is very close to coming due because the defense isn't really there. He mostly relies on being tough as shit, being durable, having a good chin. And CLD, I think, might have target practice here on the feet. So if that's the case, he could definitely clip him. But, if not, I think the judges will be behind CLD for the damage here. I think that the path for Roman is either to get his first submission. He's never gotten a submission, even though he's so dangerous and has ripped guys' legs apart and all this other stuff in the UFC. Never technically gotten a submission. I think that most of his win equity is to either go out there and get that sub or to grease a close decision with 3 takedowns and a lot of control time. And I just don't trust the 38-year-old guy whose cardio has been a little bit diminished lately to have that kind of pace in this fight. So for me, the pick is CLD. All right, guys, take a quick sip of the coffee. Appreciate everybody still rocking with us. 1:18 local time, and I hope that we can get some great picks and some great breakdowns to close out the night. That coffee is tremendous. We got the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame mug as well. The NCAA is going down in Cleveland, Ohio. So shout out to the great state of Ohio. Many fond memories there. And shout out to the guys from BW as well, who did an absolutely tremendous job at the D3 National Championships. But with that being said, we're right back to it, guys. We got Iwo Baranowski taking on Austin Lane. This is going down on the main card, and Iwo Baranowski went out there and put on a fight of the night war, a 1-round classic with Ibo Aslan. It might have been a 2-minute classic with Ibo Aslan. The last time that he was out there and he knocked him out after getting dropped himself, they went out there and just put on a show-stopping performance. And, Ibo Aslan is not very good. But the thing about Iwo Baranowski is I felt like he had a clear path to winning that fight with takedowns, with grappling, with wrestling. And instead, he went out there and banged it out with a guy whose best path to victory is round 1 KO. And he round 1 KO'd him right back. And that to me tells me that this guy just has balls of steel. He knows that he wants to go out there and fight hard. He knows that he can go out there and finish guys. And I think that Iwo is a dangerous character. He's also got the, invincibility of youth, right? Like, I do think that this guy does feel like he can't get hit, or he can't get finished. Like, he's built differently, and that can get you clipped in this fight game, right? So I think eventually Iwo will get clipped. I just don't think Austin Lane is the guy to do it. Austin Lane is cutting down at 38 years of age. He used to weigh, I think, 240 some odd pounds for his UFC fights at heavyweight, and now he's cutting down to 205 pounds. I could just tell you guys, it's hard to make a 35-pound cut for any length of time, right? Like, it's not easy. And then when you factor in, this guy's 38, the older you get, the harder it is to cut weight, the harder it is to do it routinely. And this guy is cutting all the way down to 205 pounds for what ends, I'm not sure, to just be the bigger guy in there. I don't think he'll take a punch very well at this weight class. And the problem that I have with Lane is, despite his big size, when you're big and tall and long like Austin Lane is, I feel like Iwo Baranowski, a guy who has a judo background, will be able to get his hips under Lane's hips, and he might be able to dump this guy ass over tea kettle. And, I think that people might have the wrong idea about who could get takedowns in that regard. Just because if Austin Lane's getting takedowns, I think it has to be kind of football tackles here at the chest level. Whereas I think if Baranowski gets the takedown, then I think that he's the kind of guy that can go out there and maybe process grapple Austin Lane like Vitor Petrino just did. Because Baranowski, I know that all of his finishes are early in the professional ranks. He's got 7 wins, and they're all via finish as a professional. But he does have a deep amateur background as well, and he has fought to decision as an amateur. So I would just let you guys know, I think Baranowski probably has the better cardio. I think he's probably got the better process overall. And Austin Lane beating Robelis de Spain, who's 1-2 in the UFC and got cut, doesn't really tell me much. Whereas him getting finished 4 times kind of tells me that this guy's really not at this level. Meanwhile, Iwo fought a guy who's like another guy who's a pretty dangerous power puncher, and he just absolutely cold cocked him after getting dropped to a knee. And, I feel like Iwo is a guy that, as far as I'm concerned, from a DFS perspective, he's a guy that you have to consider as a very strong click this week. His ITD is good. His round 1 is good. His money line is good. And, he just seems like a guy who's got an opponent in front of him who you could put up, a pretty high score against. So Austin Lane, he's got some power. He's got a decent, ability to throw that jab out there, move around a little bit. Austin Lane did get takedowns against Robelis, hold him down. So those are his, potential tools that he could go out there and use in this fight. The length, the size, hopefully for his sake, he doesn't get a bad concussion in this one because he has been knocked out pretty brutally before in the UFC. But I think that Iwo could take him down and beat him. I think Iwo could knock him out on the feet. So for those reasons, I think Iwo wins the fight and does it by finish. All right. Next up, we got Michael Paige taking on Sam Patterson, and this is a tricky one. Another fight where, my first gut feeling was Michael Paige is just going to win this fight based on his class, his experience, the fact that, he's extremely difficult to hit, the fact that Sam Patterson can be hit, he can be found on the feet, and that still all could be true. But I have some information that I heard about this fight that made me concerned. For the Paige side about his preparedness. These are guys that used to train together, and sometimes that can create a weird dynamic. And I think when you look at a guy like Michael Paige, he's 38, turning 39 very shortly, right? Like this guy's getting up there in age, and he's openly complaining about fighter pay and his matchmaking and certain things that will ruffle feathers with UFC brass and things that they don't like. And he's complained about this matchmaking as well. Now, part of that might be fighting a teammate, but also he said it's because he's not fighting a guy who's like a ranked, known name, big guy on a card type of thing. And we've seen the UFC's been doing this lately where they try and put guys on, a path to maybe get replaced by these younger contenders, give those guys an opportunity to take a crack at them. And that's what you're getting with Sam Patterson. Sam Patterson looked like a busted prospect when his UFC career started because he got knocked out by Yanal Ashmouz, and it was like, whoa, this guy comes in as a big favorite, gets knocked out by Ashmouz, who's way smaller than him. Like, this guy's just not legit. Then he moves up to 170, and since then, he got 2 first-round submissions, just cleaned up guys that weren't supposed to be here anymore, guys that got cut from the UFC roster. And then he goes out there and knocks out 2 guys on the feet that had never been stopped with strikes before. And then it's like, whoa, shit, maybe we have to take notice of this Sam Patterson guy. Does he have a little bit of tall man's defense? Absolutely, right? Like, chin is up, that's a problem. But when you look at what does Sam Patterson do well, the guy can go out there and finish submissions. And we know that Michael Paige, guys, he's been taken down 2 or more times. And actually, I shouldn't say that. I believe he's been taken down twice, exactly. Twice specifically, by every guy who tried to take him down in the UFC. So when he had a guy who didn't try to take him down, I think that was Shara Bullet, then he didn't give up any takedowns. But any guy who tried to take him down in the UFC has taken him down. And they've not only taken him down, they've taken him down more than once. Kevin Holland, I think, controlled him for 4 minutes. Hey, shout out to my guy Andrew Holland with a $20 dono. Cheers to you, my brother. I appreciate the support. But yeah, I got to pull up UFC stats and get really granular and specific. I normally go off the top of the head, guys, as you know, extemporaneously. I'm a loquacious individual. I could talk right off the dome, but I think that when you, my guy Domo taking his L on Josh Emmett, I'm sorry about that, brother. I wish it was different for you, but yeah, it was a tough night for Josh. But I appreciate everybody rocking with us in the chat. We got a lot of positive energy tonight, and I appreciate you guys for that. But going back to what I was saying, if I look back, right, Michael Paige, he was taken down twice. I'll show you guys my screen, right? So we'll share this tab. He was taken down twice by Kevin Holland on 5 attempts and controlled for 4 minutes. And that, I think, is the least amount of control time he's given up to somebody who wanted to wrestle him, right? Ian Gary wanted to wrestle him, guys. He gets 2 takedowns on 5 attempts, right? He gets 7 minutes of control time. Right? Almost half the fight is spent controlled by Ian Gary, practically half the fight. And then if we look one last time, Cannonier fight. 2 takedowns on 7 attempts. Guys, he got 8 minutes and 14 seconds of control time. And so it's just like Sam Patterson, I don't think wants brain damage, and he's trained with this guy before. So he knows that the striking is probably going to be tough sledding, right? Like I would imagine if I'm Sam Patterson, I'm like, I'm going to wrestle this guy, with shoes, singlet, and headgear, like my life depends on it, and try and take him down because Ian Gary nearly had a submission on this guy. Kevin Holland nearly had a submission on this guy. They weren't able to lock it up, right? And ifs and buts, right? If ifs and buts were candies and nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas, right? They didn't get it. So credit goes to Michael Paige. By the way, I thought Paige was going to beat Kevin Holland. I picked him to win that fight. But the thing that I haven't liked about MVP since he came to the UFC is that he has not shown good finishing instincts. I believe finishing instincts are a good sign in a fighter because it means that they don't have to spend 15 minutes out there. They can get in and get out, right? I like a guy in wrestling who can go out there and get a pinfall, right? And at the highest level, it's harder to do. But especially in high school wrestling, if you could just take that, pressure off, hey, let's go out there, let's get the pinfall, let's get in and get out, right? Make it simple, make it quick and easy. And guys that can go out there and finish in MMA can take a little bit of that, variance out of the equation, right? Not have to spend 15 minutes, not have to wait for the judges to render a bad opinion. And you look at a guy like MVP, and he doesn't really put out a ton to be judged. He does a lot of moving, a lot of defense, a lot of emoting. And I just think that when you look at Sam Patterson, he could potentially get ahead of him on volume. He could potentially go out there and, work him against the fence, kind of cage push, make it super ugly and disgusting and just try and hold on to this guy. And he could go out there and get some takedowns. And I think one takedown could change the round or the fight. And that for me is enough to just say, I think it's a dog or pass situation. I think that MVP is an incredible fighter and everything he's accomplished is extremely impressive. But you've got a young up-and-coming guy who's extremely hungry, who wants to take his place, and MVP's at odds with management. Nothing's going right in terms of the outside stuff. So it just feels to me like Sam Patterson's going to have opportunities here from a stylistic perspective, as well as from a, knowing the guy and having trained with him. What's the hardest thing about solving the MVP puzzle? You've never seen anybody like him. And this guy has, and he's trained with him before. So I think it could help him. And I feel like for Sam Patterson, again, he might get clipped in this fight. That's the downside risk is like this guy's been knocked out twice before, and he's got a dangerous elite striker in front of him. But he's also got an older guy who hasn't been pushed much in the wrestling and grappling. And when he has, things have gotten a little bit sideways for him. And I think that Sam Patterson's going to go out there and push him there. So for me, Sam Patterson, live underdog. Shout out to everybody rocking with us in the chat. My guy Domo being supportive, and I appreciate you for that. Thank you for showing up and showing out at 1:30 a.m. Who do you think is going to do better at light heavyweight, Whitaker, DeRitter, or Costa? I think DeRitter of that particular group. I just feel like Whitaker is undersized. He used to fight at 170, like 205. That's just that seems like a huge gap for Whitaker. Whereas De Ritter, we kind of know that he's had some success up in that weight class. And for Costa, I think he can compete up there. I just think he's got a pretty basic skill set overall. He's a good striker on the feet, but not a guy who's really super technical in any one position, mostly relies on athleticism. And at 205, athleticism, people have that in spades, right? It's kind of the one thing you need to succeed in that division. Except for Umar Sy, who just insta-tapped to nothing, right? I kid. It was a tight choke, but just the way he rolled over and gave that up, not something that inspired confidence. Excuse me. But that brings us, of course, to the co-main event of the evening, guys. We'll take one more sip of the coffee, and I'll cheers to the chat. Thank you all so much for the support. Next up, guys, we got Luke Riley. Luke Riley is a guy that clearly has a fan base, made an impact coming in. I tried to fade him just straight up. I'll keep it a buck when he fought Bogdan. The reason being, I thought Bogdan was a violent guy on the feet. And I thought Bogdan, more importantly, was a guy that was going to push the wrestling and the grappling. And that's exactly what he did. And Bogdan went out there, took him down several times. Luke Riley kept working his way back up to his feet, but he would get mat returned. He would get held down. He had a lot of time spent in negative minutes and positions. And unfortunately, Bogdan is a live minus 300 favorite or something. Luke Riley is like plus 2XX live on the market and instantly comes out and just snipes him in round 2. Absolutely smoked Bogdan. So hats off to him, right? He finished the job. He did what he needed to do there. But I think that when you look at Luke Riley, it did show if you bring a wrestling and grappling heavy game plan, you could potentially get this guy. Michael Aswell Jr., guys, has not attempted a single takedown on the Contender Series or in his UFC fights. So we know that Michael Aswell is a guy that is somewhat predictable, even though he's a good fighter, even though I really like his game, even though I'm rooting for Michael Aswell, the Texas kid, a USA guy, like I'm rooting for him. But the thing that I don't love for Michael Aswell is just that he does not really push a wrestling or grappling heavy game plan. He is a guy that is more than happy in most of his fights to go out there and exchange with guys on the feet and purely box. And when you just go out there and box, it does make you a tiny bit predictable, right? Guys can start to get a read on that. And I feel like for Aswell, he boxes great and he throws a lot of volume, but guys that land with big power, like Balagioki, guys that are able to mix in takedowns like Yadier Devalle, guys like Bogdan who are able to mix it up in different positions and throw some wild eye-catching offense, they were all able to win fights against Michael Aswell. Could you say like they were close and they were competitive and, they could have went either way in some cases? Like, yeah, maybe you could say that. But the problem with Aswell's style is oftentimes it comes down to close subjective decisions where he lands a ton of volume, but the other guy landed a couple big punches and maybe kept up with him on the volume in some rounds and maybe landed a couple more kicks and Aswell landed a couple more punches and maybe there was one takedown apiece. Or it's just the kind of thing where Aswell has had a hard time separating from his opponents. When he knocked out Lucas Almeida, that was awesome, right? But Almeida was clearly compromised coming into that fight. And so I think highly of Aswell, but they send him to a place where he's probably not going to get a fair shake on the cards. And it's like, okay, well, if he doesn't get a fair shake on the cards, then he's got to go knock this guy out. And I think that he could potentially knock him out. I just don't think it's super high percentage, right? Like, I think Luke Riley has been hurt before. He's been clipped before, but he's a tough guy and he's a hard guy to get out of there. And I feel like they'll give him every benefit of every doubt. And meanwhile, Aswell on the other side, he's a super tough guy. He's a super durable guy. So I think more often than not, this fight goes to the cards. The one thing that Riley does is work the body really hard. And maybe even a tough guy, like if you just get hit right in the liver, like you go down. And when you present yourself constantly in exchanges, you can get clipped like that. So that's the one downside risk, I think, for Aswell. But ultimately, I just think he's a tough customer. I think it's probably going to go the distance. I think it's probably going to be a fight of the night candidate. I think both guys are going to land a ton of volume. But give me Luke Riley to get the win here via decision at home. I think that's how it goes down. All right. And last but not least, guys, Here's the two undefeated fighters. We talked about him off the rip. It's the main event of the evening. Movsar Evloev, a guy who a lot of people have said, hey, he should be a title challenger. And I truly believe, guys, the one single reason that he's not a title challenger is that this guy does not have one finish in the UFC that they can market. If you look at how the UFC likes to promote fights, they take a highlight reel of your finishes, they put it together. Look at these finishes. They talk about your fight night bonuses. They talk about all this stuff because that tells fans this is going to be action, this is going to be exciting, easy marketing, easy sell to casuals. And Movsar Evloev is the opposite of an easy sell to casuals. He is a wrestler with 9 wins in the promotion, all of them decisions. One of them was a split. He's lost a round in several of these fights. Like, you just look and like Movsar is in competitive fights where he ekes out decisions and he normally wrestles to do it. That's not something that's going to get you the biggest fan base in the UFC's current ecosystem, right? And when you look at a 32-year-old who's been shelved multiple times due to things outside, the cage, visa issues, I think some injury stuff. Like, he's just had a lot of stuff that's kept him from being very active. And so, we kind of just have him stagnating on the outside as the division, has kind of existed without him. And he beats Diego Lopes. Diego Lopes goes on and gets multiple title shots in front of him. Just because Diego Lopes, when he wins, finishes fights, does it in exciting fashion. And when Movsar wins, people don't talk about it very much 5 days later. And that's the sad part. But meanwhile, on the other side, Lerone Murphy, he has dealt with some similar problems in terms of, hey, the name recognition is not really there. The fame, the popularity, not really popping off the page. And so we're not going to fast track this guy to a title shot, even though he's got a bunch of wins inside the promotion. But what does Lerone Murphy have? He's got an undefeated record. He's earned this opportunity. He's 34 years of age. He's in a main event at home. And everything that he's ever wanted in the UFC is on the other side of a win here. Meaning, if he wants a title shot, if he wants a chance to break through, get mainstream stardom, and all this stuff that comes with winning the UFC belt, it comes down to needing to win this fight. This is the make or break fight in many ways of Lerone Murphy's career. And Movsar is a tough task, right? Movsar is a tough customer. He's going to show up in shape. You know that he's going to come out, wrestle tough, and be very aggressive with his takedowns. And that's the kind of thing that is going to probably cause Lerone Murphy some problems, right? I called Movsar Evloev a stylistic nightmare in many ways for Lerone Murphy because of his takedowns, his swarming pressure, his ability to go out there and look to put you on the mat, right? Sit you to your butt. But the thing about this fight is I think there's 2 equalizers here for Lerone Murphy. The first equalizer is the 5-round nature of the contest. Movsar Evloev has unanimously lost the 3rd round. Let me pull this up because I just sent these notes on Patreon before. But I went into deep detail, on the MMA decisions page to really see the rounds that Movsar was losing, to make sure it wasn't just my opinions going based on my tape study, where I do normally have my own scores as well when I watch a fight. But let me see here. Okay, so now we've got this pulled up. I'll show you this on screen. Let's do that. You know what? Why not? So I'll just read this aloud because I think it can be instructive. Okay, here we go. So Evloev is a brutal style matchup for Murphy, but 5 rounds and the fight being in England feel like equalizers. Lerone is the more proven finisher. Fact. He should have the crowd behind him. And he is 2-0-1 as a UFC underdog with 2 first-round KO wins. So against Aaron Pico, he was the underdog. Against Ricardo Ramos, he was the underdog. He smoked both guys in the first round, and both guys were supposed to go out there and out-wrestle him, out-grapple him, right? Then you look at the fight with Zubair Tukhugov. It was his UFC debut. He was a plus 270 underdog. He eked out a split draw there. One judge scored it for him. One judge scored it for Tukhugov. One judge scored it a draw. Call it a draw. But you look at this guy really goes out there to compete. Then you look at this is the rest of the analysis. I'll read the rest where we stopped. Even if Evloev dominates minutes, one mistake and this fight could be over. Evloev has tired out before. Again, fact. and got walked down late by Hakeem Dawodu, unanimously lost round 3. And Arnold Allen unanimously lost round 3 on all 3 judges' scorecards. Evloev unanimously lost round 1 against Aljamain Sterling. Unanimously lost round 1 against Nick Lentz. And by the way, one judge scored that fight for Nick Lentz. He gave him round 2 as well. Then you look at he dropped 1 round on at least one judge's scorecard against Mike Grundy, Enrique Barzola, Diego Lopes. So what is the common denominator? Movsar Evloev has a style that is not super predicated on damage. It's mostly predicated on takedowns and control. He doesn't have bad striking, but it's a little bit more fundamental, meat and potatoes, stick to your basics, not looking to get super aggressive, not looking to come forward, get out of position, land big shots, mostly looking to keep it, behind the 8 ball, keep a little bit out there, just do enough to win each round close, to win the fight close. He does not go out there to dominate fights. And I feel like the thing about Lerone Murphy that we've learned is he's hard to kill. He stays in the fight mentally. So even if he's down, even if he's getting taken down, even if he's in a bad position, I don't think he's going to give up on himself. I don't think he's going to quit on himself, particularly in front of his home fans in England. I think that will give him the energy, the motivation to keep getting back up. And I've seen Movsar get tired. I've seen Lerone Murphy throw 200-plus significant strikes over the course of 5 rounds, land 200-plus significant strikes against Edson Barboza. I've seen him go out there, get taken down 4 times by Josh Emmett and not get controlled for 4 minutes, working back up to his feet quickly, not settling on bottom. Movsar is a different challenge. Movsar is probably going to control him for 6-7 minutes. Poor choice of words. Shout out to the kids for their memes. But, when you look, I think he's probably going to control him for, a decent portion of the first 2 rounds. But I think if Lerone Murphy is able to get off some damage, he could sneak out close rounds based on damage versus control. I think he will have the crowd eaten out of the palm of his hand. I think if Evloev starts to tire out, Murphy could take over in a big way. And for all those reasons, I think that Lerone Murphy is a live underdog. And so, again, pre-fight, maybe it would be a smaller click, and then I'd consider, getting involved live after things start to, go wrong in the first round. Because I do think Lerone's going to get taken down. I think he's going to face adversity. We saw against Aaron Pico, he was getting taken down. He was facing pressure. He was facing some adversity. But I think the difference between Pico and Movsar Evloev is that Pico is extremely dangerous. He can get you out of there. He's kill or be killed in the truest sense of the word. And I think that Evloev makes fewer mistakes, but he is a guy that's less dangerous. And so Pico is going to go out there and give himself a chance to finish you. But if it doesn't materialize, he's going to leave himself in danger. Movsar Evloev doesn't put himself in a lot of danger, but he also will not take a big risk to go out there and finish somebody. And I think that in a fight like this, when you have to be out there for 5 rounds and you haven't done it in an extremely long time, it's tough. And I think that Lerone Murphy is going to go out there and give him honest 25 minutes of hell, unless we see a new layer from Movsar Evloev that we haven't seen. And so for all those reasons, again, I think it's a live underdog spot. And in my article, I actually picked Lerone Murphy to get the win here because if you're a guy who goes out there and relies on decisions and you're taking a main event in England, you got to go out there and win clean, man. You got to leave no doubt, or they might just take that one away from you. And I feel like there's nobody the UFC would like to see lose more than a guy like Movsar Evloev personally. So for that reason, I'm going to pick Lerone Murphy, but I do think that it's a tough challenge for him. It's a real serious fight. Movsar, you don't get to 19-0 for no reason. He's strong. He can really wrestle. He can move well. He's good. I just think that Movsar is a guy that could get tired, that could make mistakes, that could end up giving it up before all said and done. And, walking onto a big shot, getting hurt and getting finished. So for all those reasons, I think Lerone's just a little bit more dangerous and a little bit more poised under pressure. I've seen Movsar kind of start to really get skittish when shit was going sideways. And I feel like Lerone Murphy's just about that life. So if he gets grapple fucked, he gets grapple fucked. But I think that he's going to give himself chances on the feet. And I think in the damage versus control era, Lerone Murphy's going to do more damage in most iterations of this fight. That does it, guys. That's everything that I got for you. I want to give a special shout out to our guy, Andrew Holland, for the solo shot. Appreciate you so much for the dono, my man. I appreciate you showing love and support for the show. It is 1:45 a.m. Eastern here, guys, and we're just wrapping up. We did about 70 odd minutes about UFC London. It's all going down tomorrow, I believe at 1 p.m. Eastern, early start time. So set those alarms, get yourself ready. Should be a fun day of fights. Lord willing, we get some finishes. Lord willing, we get some underdogs. The UFC has been riding hot on favorites and overs, it feels like, recently. So I'd like to see some dogs and some violence as a good old fight fan myself. But that's all that I got for you guys today. If you got any questions, comments, concerns about these fights, please go ahead and drop them down in the comments. I'll try to get to as many as possible. I'm going to try and timestamp the show as well. So if you joined us late, I'm going to try to get it so it's easy to navigate, quick and easy for you guys. And I truly appreciate the support. Thank you, Joey, as well. He says, great show, brother. Thank you, my man. It's a blessing and a privilege to be here. I appreciate that you guys care to hear my opinions on these fights. And Lord willing, we can all do well together. So God bless you all. Good luck on those fights. Come back next time. We're having all the same fun again. Take care, everybody.